Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be exploring the economic landscape of Moldova.
Moldova.
You might be thinking Moldova. Why Moldova?
All right.
But trust me, this isn't your average country profile.
Yeah.
We're about to uncover how a nation roughly the size of Maryland has weathered some serious storms, COVID, an energy crisis, and a war right on its doorstep.
It's a fascinating case study in resilience. You know, this tiny nation sandwiched between Romania and Ukraine, it's like an economic tightrope walker constantly adapting to stay balanced.
Yeah, and our guide for this deep dive is a 2025 report from Expert-Grup, a leading Moldovan think tank.
Oh, very good.
They've really dug deep into how Moldova's economy is structured, how it's been impacted by these external shocks, and what its prospects are for the future.
What's so compelling is that Moldova's story is about more than just numbers. It's about a nation's determination to break free from its Soviet past and forge a new path towards Europe.
Yeah, that's a great point. For a long time, Moldova was heavily reliant on Russia, both economically and politically. But over the past few decades, it's been steadily shifting towards the European Union.
Imagine a pendulum swinging from east to west. That's essentially what we're seeing with Moldova's economic orientation.
And one of the key catalysts for this shift was the Deep and Comprehensive Free Trade Area, or DCFTA, with the EU, which came into effect in 2014. Think of it as a massive economic doorway that opened up between Moldova and the EU.
The DCFTA has been a game changer for Moldova. It's allowed them to boost exports to the EU market, which has helped to offset the losses they've experienced from reduced trade with Russia and other former Soviet states.
Yeah, it's almost like they found a new economic engine to power their growth. And let's not forget about the impact of visa-free travel to the EU for Moldovan citizens, which also came into effect in 2014.
Absolutely. Visa-free travel has fostered closer ties between Moldova and the EU, making it easier for people to work, study, and do business across borders. It's like a bridge that's brought these two regions closer together.
But of course, no journey is without its bumps. Moldova has also faced a series of internal challenges that has complicated its path towards European integration.
You're right. Issues like the 2014 bank fraud, which saw $1 billion vanish from Moldovan banks, along with persistent political instability and corruption, have definitely slowed things down.
Yeah, and just as Moldova seemed to be gaining momentum, Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022. It's hard to overstate the impact this has had on Moldova, a country that shares a long border with Ukraine and is deeply interconnected with both Russia and Ukraine.
The war in Ukraine has been like a seismic shock to Moldova's economy. It's intensified their energy dependence on Russia, disrupted trade routes, and led to a huge influx of Ukrainian refugees.
Yeah, it's really put their resilience to the test.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets interesting. Despite these challenges, Moldova has shown remarkable adaptability.
That's a key takeaway from the Expert-Grup report. For example, Moldova managed to synchronize its power grid with the continental European system. This is a huge step towards energy independence because it allows them to import electricity from EU countries like Romania instead of relying solely on Russia.
So it's like they're rewiring their entire energy system to break free from that dependence on Russia. That's incredibly significant. And on top of that, they've received considerable financial assistance from international partners, which has helped to cushion the blow from the war.
Exactly. This international support has been a lifeline for Moldova, demonstrating the importance of global cooperation during times of crisis.
All right, so we've talked about the political backdrop. Now let's get into the nuts and bolts of Moldova's economy. The Expert-Grup report paints a picture of an economy that's relatively small, but undergoing a period of transition.
In 2023, Moldova's GDP was around $16.5 billion. To put that into perspective, that's about the same size as the economy of Vermont. And their GDP per capita, which is a measure of how much wealth is produced per person, was about $6,732.
So while they're not a powerhouse economy like Germany or France, they're definitely not standing still.
But the report also highlights that Moldova's economic growth has slowed down since 2014, averaging just 2.2% per year. Is that a good thing or a bad thing for a country like Moldova?
Well, it's a mixed bag. On the one hand, consistent growth, even if it's slow, is better than no growth at all. However, for a developing country like Moldova, that rate is relatively low, especially considering they need to catch up with their European neighbors. There are a few things driving this slowdown: a shrinking population, external shocks like the pandemic and the war in Ukraine, and some structural challenges within their economy.
Okay, let's unpack those structural challenges. What are the main sectors that make up Moldova's economy, and how are they performing?
Moldova's economy is in a state of flux. Agriculture, which used to be the backbone of their economy, is shrinking. While it still plays a significant role, it's increasingly vulnerable to climate change, especially droughts. You can imagine the impact. If a country relies heavily on agriculture and then faces severe droughts, it can really hit their overall economic output. Yeah, I can see how that would create instability. What's filling the gap left by the shrinking agricultural sector?
The service sector is on the rise, with trade and transportation playing a major role. And here's a bright spot. The IT sector is experiencing rapid growth, fueled in part by a favorable tax regime that's attracted tech companies.
It sounds like Moldova is trying to diversify its economy and move towards higher value sectors like IT. But what about their financial system? How are their banks and other financial institutions holding up amidst all this change?
Moldova's financial system is dominated by banks. In 2023, they held nearly 90% of all the assets in the financial sector.
Wow, 90%. That's a lot of concentration. Is that a cause for concern?
It's definitely something to keep an eye on. Within the banking sector itself, there's also a high level of concentration. The top 5 banks hold a staggering 86% of the assets. It's like having all your eggs in a few baskets.
So if one of those banks were to run into trouble, it could have a ripple effect throughout the entire financial system.
Exactly. But the report also notes that despite these vulnerabilities, Moldova's banking sector has shown resilience even in the face of the war. Banks are well capitalized, meaning they have enough cushion to absorb losses, and they have healthy liquidity ratios.
Can you explain what liquidity ratios are in simple terms? I imagine not all our listeners are financial experts.
You're right. Think of it this way. A liquidity ratio is like a bank's ability to quickly access cash when needed. A healthy liquidity ratio means the bank has enough readily available funds to meet its short-term obligations, like covering withdrawals from depositors. So even if there's a sudden shock or crisis, a bank with good liquidity can keep operating smoothly.
That makes sense. So despite the concentration, there are signs that Moldova's banks are in a relatively strong position. What about other parts of their financial system?
Yeah.
Are there any alternatives to banks?
Yes, we're seeing some growth in what are called non-bank financial institutions. These include insurance companies and non-bank lenders, which are like specialized financial companies that provide loans and other financial services. This growth is good news because it provides more options for people and businesses looking for financial services, making the system more resilient.
So it's a bit like having a backup generator in case the main power goes out. It's good to have options. Now let's talk about trade. Moldova is a landlocked country, which means it relies heavily on its neighbors for access to the sea. How does that impact its economy?
Being landlocked definitely presents challenges for Moldova. Trade is crucial for their economy, but it also makes them vulnerable to disruptions in transportation routes or political tensions with neighboring countries.
So who are their main trading partners, and how has the war in Ukraine affected those relationships?
Romania is a major player, absorbing 35% of Moldova's goods exports in 2023. But the war in Ukraine has forced many Moldovan importers to reroute their shipments, leading to higher costs and delays.
So being landlocked and reliant on a few key partners can create a bottleneck. Are there any positive trends emerging in Moldova's trade sector?
One positive trend is the growth in services exports, driven by their booming IT sector and a recovering tourism industry. These digital services aren't bound by physical borders in the same way that goods are, so it's a way for Moldova to diversify its trade and become less reliant on physical goods.
That's a smart strategy. It's like they're building a virtual bridge to the global economy. But all of this economic activity relies on people. What's happening with Moldova's workforce, especially given their aspirations to join the EU?
Moldova is facing a demographic challenge: immigration. Over the past decade, they've lost about 25,000 working-age individuals each year.
That's a significant brain drain. What's driving this exodus, and how is it impacting their economy?
There are a few factors at play. Wages and job opportunities are often better in other European countries, which is a big draw for young Moldovans seeking a brighter future. This immigration has contributed to labor shortages in certain sectors, making it harder for businesses to find qualified workers.
And I imagine the influx of Ukrainian refugees, while a humanitarian necessity, hasn't entirely offset these labor shortages.
That's right. While Moldova has welcomed a large number of Ukrainian refugees, many of them are working remotely for Ukrainian companies or facing language barriers that make it difficult for them to integrate into the local job market.
So it's a complex situation.
Yeah.
They need to find ways to attract and retain their own workforce while also supporting and integrating newcomers. Now let's dive into a topic that's been looming large in our discussion: Energy. The Expert-Grup report really emphasizes Moldova's dependence on energy imports, particularly from Russia.
Energy security has always been a major vulnerability for Moldova. Historically, they've relied heavily on Russia for natural gas and electricity.
And that dependence became painfully clear during the energy crisis and the war in Ukraine. Can you explain how that dependence played out in practical terms?
Imagine having to rely on a single supplier for something as essential as energy. You're at their mercy when it comes to prices and supply. That's the situation Moldova found itself in. When Russia started using energy as a political weapon, restricting supplies and raising prices, it had a devastating impact on Moldova's economy and its people.
So it's not just about keeping the lights on, it's about national security and economic stability. What steps has Moldova taken to address this vulnerability?
As we mentioned earlier, one of the most significant moves has been synchronizing their power grid with the continental European system. This essentially means connecting their electricity grid to the European network, allowing them to import electricity from EU countries, particularly Romania.
It's like they're plugging into a new energy source, one that's more reliable and less subject to political manipulation. But I imagine this transition is a massive undertaking, both technically and financially.
Absolutely. It requires upgrading infrastructure, coordinating with multiple countries, and making significant investments. But the benefits are huge in terms of energy security and independence.
So it's a long-term play, but a necessary one. What other steps are they taking to enhance their energy security?
They're pursuing a multi-pronged approach, diversifying their energy sources, promoting renewable energy, improving energy efficiency, and upgrading their energy infrastructure.
Can you give us some specific examples of what that looks like on the ground?
Sure. One example is the construction of a 400-kV Volcanesti-Chisinau overhead transmission line, which is being financed by the World Bank. This high-capacity power line will improve the reliability and efficiency of their electricity grid, making it easier to import and distribute electricity. They're also investing in renewable energy projects like solar and wind power to reduce their reliance on fossil fuels.
Those are all smart moves.
Yeah.
It sounds like they're really committed to building a more sustainable and secure energy future. Well, we've covered a lot of ground so far, from Moldova's political journey and economic structure to its banking system, trade dynamics, workforce challenges, and energy vulnerabilities. It's clear that Moldova is facing a complex set of challenges, but they're also demonstrating remarkable resilience and adaptability.
What's fascinating is how all these pieces are interconnected. Their political aspirations towards Europe are influencing their economic decisions. The war in Ukraine is reshaping their energy strategy, and their efforts to boost competitiveness are tied to attracting investment and developing a skilled workforce.
It's like a giant puzzle where all the pieces are constantly shifting. And speaking of shifting pieces, the Expert-Grup report doesn't just analyze the challenges, it offers a set of policy recommendations to help Moldova navigate these turbulent waters and build a stronger, more resilient economy.
I'm excited to dive into those recommendations in our next segment. They offer valuable insights not just for Moldova, but for any country facing similar challenges in today's interconnected world.
I'm ready to unpack those recommendations. But first, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back to continue our deep dive into Moldova's economic resilience.
All right, so let's unpack those policy recommendations. Expert-Grup has laid out a pretty bold vision for Moldova's future, addressing everything from European integration to financial markets to energy security. It's a comprehensive approach.
Yeah, that's what makes this report so compelling. They're not just pointing out the problems, they're offering concrete solutions.
Yeah.
So where do they suggest Moldova focus its efforts? What are some of the key takeaways?
Well, their top recommendation is crystal clear. Moldova needs to anchor itself firmly in the European Union. They see completing accession negotiations with the EU as absolutely vital for achieving long-term economic stability.
So it's about more than just trade deals. It's about aligning Moldova's laws, regulations, and institutions with EU standards. It's about becoming a full-fledged member of the European club.
Precisely. And that alignment can create a more stable and predictable environment for businesses and investors. It sends a signal that Moldova is open for business, that it's committed to the rule of law, and that it's a reliable partner.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like laying a solid foundation for future growth. What other recommendations stand out to you?
Another critical area they highlight is the need to address labor market imbalances. Moldova is facing a shrinking workforce due to immigration, so they need to find ways to either attract Moldovan immigrants back to the country or implement skill development programs to better match workers with available jobs.
It's like they're facing a brain drain. And they need to find ways to either reverse that flow or train up their existing workforce to meet the demands of a modern economy.
Right. It's about investing in human capital. It's about creating opportunities that make staying in Moldova a more appealing choice for young people who might otherwise be tempted to seek their fortunes elsewhere.
Okay, I'm seeing a pattern here. A lot of these recommendations are about tackling those core structural issues that have been holding Moldova back. What else is on their list?
They also emphasize the need to enhance what's called financial intermediation. Now, that sounds like a mouthful, but it's basically about making sure that businesses have access to the financing they need to grow and thrive.
Okay, can you break that down for us non-financial folks? What does enhancing financial intermediation actually look like in practice?
Think of it this way. Businesses need capital. They need money to invest in new equipment, hire workers, expand their operations. Traditionally, banks have been the primary source of financing for businesses. But Expert-Grup is arguing that Moldova needs to deepen its capital market.
So it's about moving beyond just bank loans. What are some examples of a deeper capital market?
It means developing things like stock markets, bond markets, and investment funds. These are all mechanisms that allow businesses to raise capital from a wider range of investors, not just banks.
So it's about creating a more diverse and robust financial ecosystem. It's like building a network of roads and bridges to make sure that capital can flow easily to where it's needed most.
Exactly. It's about giving businesses more options and making the whole system more resilient.
What about attracting foreign investment? Moldova needs capital to fuel its development. But how do they convince investors to choose Moldova over other countries?
That's a key challenge. The report stresses the importance of attracting foreign investment, especially in sectors that create high value-added jobs and promote technological advancement. But to do that, they need to create a more favorable business environment.
So it's not just about offering tax breaks or other incentives. It's about creating a level playing field where businesses feel confident that their investments are protected and that the rules of the game are clear and transparent.
Right. It's about tackling corruption, strengthening the rule of law, and streamlining regulations. These are all factors that can make Moldova a more attractive destination for foreign investors.
It's about building trust and credibility. Okay, what about boosting Moldova's competitiveness on the global stage? How can they stand out in a crowded marketplace?
The report focuses on improving productivity and reducing reliance on imports, particularly for energy. They see renewable energy development and energy efficiency measures as critical for achieving those goals.
So it's about becoming more self-sufficient and less vulnerable to those external shocks we talked about earlier. It's also about becoming more environmentally sustainable.
Absolutely. They're also emphasizing the need to strengthen Moldova's capacity to absorb foreign assistance.
What do they mean by that? It's not just about getting aid, it's about using it effectively.
Exactly. It's about making sure that aid is truly transformative, that it's not just a band-aid solution, but actually contributes to sustainable development.
It's about making sure that the money is well spent, that it goes towards projects that will have a lasting impact.
Right. And finally, they highlight the importance of improving the overall business environment. This means tackling corruption, enhancing transparency, and ensuring a predictable regulatory framework.
It's about creating an environment where businesses can thrive, where entrepreneurs feel supported, and where investors feel confident. So it's a pretty comprehensive set of recommendations. They're really looking at every aspect of the economy.
What's impressive is that these recommendations are all interconnected. They address both immediate challenges and long-term structural issues. It's a holistic approach to building a more resilient and prosperous Moldova.
It's like they're saying, here's a roadmap, but it's up to Moldova to take the wheel and steer toward a better future. What are your thoughts on these recommendations? Do you think they're achievable?
I think they're ambitious, but definitely achievable. Moldova has a lot going for it: a young and adaptable workforce, a growing IT sector, and a strategic location at the crossroads of Europe. But it will require strong leadership, political will, and a commitment to reform.
It's a tall order, but it sounds like they're up for the challenge. Okay, we've covered the policy recommendations. Now let's shift gears and talk about something that's been woven throughout our conversation: the impact of the war in Ukraine. It's impossible to talk about Moldova's economy without acknowledging the shadow cast by this conflict.
You're right. The war has been a defining event for Moldova, both economically and politically. It's accelerated certain trends that were already underway, forcing them to make tough choices and adapt quickly.
It's like the war has been a stress test for their economy, pushing them to their limits, but also revealing their resilience. What are some of the most profound ways that the war has impacted Moldova?
Well, take energy security, for example. Moldova's reliance on Russian gas was a vulnerability for years, but the war made it an urgent crisis. That's what spurred the rapid synchronization with the European power grid.
It's a classic case of necessity being the mother of invention.
Exactly. And we see similar dynamics playing out in other areas. The war has disrupted trade routes, forcing Moldova to find new partners and diversify its export markets.
It's like the war has forced them to reevaluate their economic relationships, both with the East and the West.
Right. And it's also had a profound impact on Moldova's people. The influx of refugees has been a testament to Moldova's compassion, but it's also added to the strain on its resources.
It's a reminder that economic resilience is about more than just numbers. It's about a nation's ability to support its people, even in the face of extraordinary challenges. How has Moldova managed to cope with this influx of refugees?
They've shown remarkable solidarity. The government, along with civil society organizations and ordinary citizens, have stepped up to provide shelter, food, medical care, and other forms of support to Ukrainian refugees.
It sounds like they've mobilized their entire society to respond to this crisis.
They have, and they've done so despite their own economic challenges. It's a testament to their compassion and resilience.
It's also a reminder that we're all interconnected. What happens in one part of the world can have ripple effects across borders and continents. So while the war has created hardship, it's also revealed Moldova's strength and resilience.
I think that's a key takeaway from this deep dive. Moldova's story is one of adaptation, of finding ways to navigate through incredibly difficult circumstances.
It's a story that's inspiring and insightful, and it offers valuable lessons for any country facing similar challenges.
I couldn't agree more. It's a testament to the power of human ingenuity and determination. Now we've thrown a lot of information at you, so let's take a moment to reflect. What stands out to you from all of this? What are some of the most surprising or memorable facts you've learned about Moldova?
Honestly, I was struck by how Moldova has managed to decrease its reliance on Russia for energy. It's a delicate balancing act, especially given the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. It shows real courage and determination.
That's a great observation. It highlights the complexity of geopolitical and economic relationships. It's about making strategic choices to secure a brighter future.
And I was also fascinated by how Moldova is leveraging its IT sector to boost its economy and connect to the global marketplace. It's a reminder that even small countries can find their niche and become players on the world stage.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing your strengths and playing to them. So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I'm left with a sense of admiration for Moldova. It's a small nation with a big heart, and it's proving that even in the face of global upheaval, it's possible to not just survive, but to thrive.
I couldn't agree more. Their journey is far from over. But they're showing the world what's possible with determination, adaptability, and a bit of ingenuity. But before we get too sentimental, we still got one more segment to go. We'll be back to explore some final thoughts and discuss what the future might hold for this resilient little nation. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been exploring Moldova's economy, a nation facing incredible challenges but showing remarkable resilience. We've talked about their political journey, economic structure, the impact of the war, and even dug into some policy recommendations. But before we wrap up, I wanted to touch on something we haven't really addressed, the human side of this story.
Yeah, that's a crucial point. We've talked a lot about GDP, trade, energy, but behind all those numbers are real people whose lives are directly impacted by all of this.
Exactly. What are some of the realities for people in Moldova? What are their hopes and dreams, their struggles?
Well, imagine a young person in Moldova just graduated university. They're bright, ambitious, eager to build a career, but they face a choice. Stay in Moldova, where opportunities might be limited, or go somewhere else, maybe the EU, where wages are higher and things seem better.
It's a decision a lot of young Moldovans face. That pull towards Europe is strong, especially with visa-free travel and the appeal of a different life.
Right. And it's not just young people. Families are grappling with these choices too. Parents want the best for their kids, and sometimes that means leaving their home to find a better future.
Yeah, it's a story we hear from countries with economic problems. The human cost of people leaving, families separated, skilled workers leaving. It's a reminder that economic choices have real consequences for people's lives.
Absolutely. And we can't forget those who stay in Moldova. They're the backbone of the economy. The entrepreneurs, the farmers, the teachers, healthcare workers, everyday people working to build a future for themselves and their communities.
They're driving the changes we've been talking about, embracing new ideas, adapting to new situations, and they're resilient.
Their stories are just as important as all the economic numbers we've been talking about. They're shaping Moldova's future. One business, one farm, one classroom at a time.
And they're doing it with all the uncertainty and upheaval around them. It shows their strength.
That's what's so compelling about Moldova. It's a reminder that even with huge challenges, there's always hope, potential, and people who want to fight for a better future.
It's inspiring and humbling. As we wrap up, I'm optimistic. Despite the difficulties, Moldova is transforming, and it's worth watching.
Totally agree. Moldova's future is still being written. But one thing's for sure, they're not just watching. They're shaping their future, embracing change, showing what resilience means.
That's a message for all of us, no matter the challenges. A pandemic, an energy crisis, a war nearby, or just trying to make ends meet. We can adapt, innovate, build a better future for ourselves and our communities.
Well said. It's been great exploring Moldova with you. Hope our listeners learned something new and maybe found some inspiration from this small but determined country.
I agree. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive. Keep learning about Moldova. It's a story that matters.